So thank you, Nate. I didn't know he was going to put me first, so there's a lot of information in this presentation, and I've given this many times, so at any point, if I see like glazed eyes, like it's just going right over, and I need to slow down, just let me know and ask questions whenever you like. So today I'm going to be covering, as Nate mentioned earlier, is Next Level Ag and how we have moved into 365. So to begin with, I'm Kristina Reindl. Again, I started with Next Level Ag almost 5 years ago now. So started there as a microbiologist and did the QC reports that you see when you enter or submit a Next Level Ag soil or tissue sample. And then started getting more into the research side with Jason. So with Next Level Ag, are you guys familiar? Who here has sent a soil sample to Next Level Ag? Raise your hand if you have. Okay, so I see a few. Who soil samples in general here? Okay, a lot of you. And tissue sampling, about the same. Most people are doing tissue sampling. So if you have sent your soil sample to Next Level Ag, especially if you've gotten the indicator report, you get back that information and you're like, holy smokes, this is a lot of data, and I have no idea what to do with it. And you would even think that if you were to send that to any soil lab and you get back your standard university rec, again, what they're looking at is the levels that are found in the soil and how to adjust for that. So with most labs, you're going to get back a recommendation that's going to tell you your nitrogen is low and this is what you need to apply, or your P or K is low. And what they're not taking into account is the relationships and ratios between those nutrients, and that if you over-apply a nutrient, it causes the whole system to go out of whack. And as we all know, we're applying more and more fertilizer every single year to hit that glass ceiling of yield, and we just can't figure out why. Well, that's because the soil is out of balance. So you're not going to be having optimal nutrient uptake if you don't have all of the freeways available and free for that nutrient to go up into the plant. So Jason built the indicator soil analysis, and as I said, that's very in-depth. So we're studying the biological, the chemical, and the physical forms of the soil, and we're breaking it down into not just what's available in the soil, but what's actively being taken up into the plant. So we track that throughout the season to help you understand where your weak points are at, where those kinks are at that's not bringing up the nutrient that you're making available in the soil or that you're laying down at the beginning of the year. So we took all of that information and then we paired it together with the tissue analysis. So now we know how much is in the soil to begin with, how much is in the gas tank, as Jason says, and then how much is actively being taken up into the plant, and then how much does the tissue have in that? How much is the tissue utilizing that soil's nutrients? So after many, many consultations, Jason's schedule was filling up, walking our clients through this indicator. Then I became like a mini, consult. I'm not an agronomist, so when it comes to that kind of stuff, that's definitely out of my realm, and I pass it to Jason. But I was walking so many clients through an indicator, and afterwards they're like, oh my gosh, that makes total sense. Then they know what to do. But that's only until the next indicator comes or the next soil test, and then they're wondering again, what do I do? So Jason has been helping all of his clients at Next Level Ag, and then we have our high yield growers that are achieving these yield goals every single year, and that's because they're watching the things that farmers aren't watching. We're starting to focus on nutrient ratios and relationships and how that creates optimal uptake into the plant. So to get what I'm getting at here with 365 is we had so many clients coming in and asking these questions and finally having that aha moment of, oh, this makes sense. I'm over applying X, Y, and Z, and that's causing things to go out of whack, and I'm not getting the return that I'm looking for. So they were starting to apply less and focus on micros at the end of the season, for example, boron, and when we're supposed to apply that and how we see that directly correlated to yield at the end of the year. And it gets to be a lot. If you're making Excel spreadsheets or you're a grower and you're hearing these ratios and relationships on the phone, how do you keep track of that? So we built 365, and I will go into, do you guys have like a PowerPoint, or do I just click over? Got it. Okay. So we'll go into 365 and specifically what we watch while we're collecting these reports. So We built a specific protocol. So these are specific growth stages that you go out and take a soil test as well as a tissue test. And the different types of analysis vary based on that package, but we always want you to start with an indicator so you see everything that's available at the beginning of the year. And keep in mind, the first year that you're starting to track these nutrients, this is not the time to be changing things throughout the season or making these tweaks and changes. What you want to do is the first year when you're sending in these soil and tissue results is you're benchmarking. You're making baselines to start to understand your soil and how it moves those nutrients. So a lot of times you will send in your soil test. If you've sent them in before, you're going to get that standard university test. What you don't get with it is the biological and the physical components with the soil, as well as the HCA nutrients. So we'll go into what those differences are here. WEON. Are you familiar with WEON or WEOC? Raise your hand if you've heard that before. Okay, so we have a few. Probably if you sent it to Next Level Ag, that's what you're seeing. So WEON is your water extractable organic nitrogen. So rather just focusing on one source of nitrogen and what that level is in the soil, we're tracking a few different components. So the first thing that we look at is the SLAN test, and that's your ammonium nitrifier. So this is how quickly it's converting nitrogen into ammonium. The second is your HT3, and we'll go into that, but that's your respiration in the soil. And then lastly, we focus on the C to N ratio. So your WEOC is your water extractable organic nitrogen. So that is your purest form. That's taking your total nitrogen minus your inorganic nitrogen, and that's what's left in the soil for microbes to convert into inorganic available form to the plant. Okay, WEOC is what we look at really heavily at Next Level Ag and with 365. WEOC is your water extractable organic carbon. So think of it this way, is that your OM, a lot of growers are focusing on their OM in their soil, your organic matter. Think of your OM as like the quantity of carbon in the soil, whereas WEOC is your quality. And the reason that we track this is through research with microbiology, and we'll get into this a little bit further as well, but we know that microbes deliver free nutrients to our plant. They are the free converters in the soil. And we're having to fix that mentality that fungi are bad if you have protists in your soil or bacteria. Anything like that in your soil is good. And the higher your WEOC is, the more biomass you can have with your microbes and the more speciation you have amongst that composition of microbes. So I think of WEOC, this is a little bit elementary, but it helps. WEOC is like your feeding buffet table for microbes. So if you have a 150, a score of 150 or lower with your WEOC, think of that as you're just offering hot dogs and pizza on a table. You have 50 people in a room, and you've got 5 hot dogs and 5 pieces of pizza. I don't like hot dogs, so I'm not going to eat the hot dogs. There's not enough food for everybody. There's only 2 types of food, so you're only going to attract a certain amount of people and a certain type of person to eat what you're offering. If you have a 150 or higher of WEOC, now you have tacos, spaghetti, pizza, all sorts of food, and you have lots of it. So you're bringing in lots of microbes and giving them the food source to be able to apply that. So with WEOC, that's what we push at Next Level Ag, because OM is one of those things that you're either born with or you're not. And it's really hard to change that, but WEOC we can. And we teach you how to do that through 365. So, for example, if you're familiar with soil health, we know that crop rotation is helping with carb restoration in the soil, having a cover crop, but also in addition to that is when I first met with QLF, they had a carbon source. Who's here remembers what that product was? Yeah, so Boost is what we were talking about at the last meeting that I was with Nate at. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, is you want to first understand your soil, and we'll go into this again, but see where the pH is at, see what the food source amount is, what's your WEOC score? If it's 150 or higher, you have enough food to introduce a biological and a food source with that and see really great results. Whereas if you have a 150 or lower, we need to work on your carbon storage in the soil because we don't have enough carbon to support not only the nitrogen that you're applying at the end of the year or at the beginning of the season, but also the microbes as their food source. So we watch those WEOC levels pretty heavily, and we definitely compare it to the nitrogen. So what I'm talking about with the nitrogen is, let's go kind of skipping around a little bit. But just to touch, this is the amino nitrogen that we follow in the indicator report, just to show how well that nitrogen is released. The HT3, that respiration, this is something that's included in the indicator. It's a really great way to have a snapshot of the respiration in your soil. Why I like it is it's quick, it's a quick turnaround, and it does give you, like I said, a great snapshot. As a microbiologist, the issues that I have with this is that a lot of clients use it as like a golden star. So a good number for HT3 is also 150 or higher. And if it's below that, they think, oh my gosh, my soil health isn't very good, I don't have a lot of activity. Or if it's the opposite, really high, they think, I don't have to focus on my carbon, my HT3 is really good, I don't have to worry about a thing. But it is just a snapshot. So I will get an indicator back and there'll be a 200 HT3, and that grower's like, awesome. I don't have to add in biology, my soil health is good, we're good to go. But I look at their pH and it's high, and I look at their nitrogen amount and it's very high. So I can guess that they probably just applied a fertilizer. And that caused their HT3 to skyrocket and burn up the carbon in the soil, and it's gonna plummet within 3 days. And now the system's out of whack again. So we watch that, but you don't wanna, it's not the end all be all. Just keep a loose idea of that HT3 is it's just a snapshot of that. In addition to that, it doesn't show you what is respiring in the soil. And we want not only bacterial activity, but we also want fungal and protists to be active in there. And as you add fungal biomass to your soil, you see that HT3 skyrocket immediately because those are larger organisms breaking down larger amounts of mass. And they're gonna give you the most return nutrient-wise. And we'll get into that. But I just wanna keep that in mind. When you see your HT3, don't take that as the end all be all. That's just a snapshot. So here again is where we're talking about that WEOC and WEON. So anytime that the carbon levels are greater than 12:1 in the soil, that means that your soil is holding onto that nitrogen really well for the later season needs. So we watch this carbon to nitrogen ratio because if it is above a 12:1, that means that we can stick to applying that nitrogen closer to the band as it's going to spoon feed throughout the season and ensure that we have enough to spoon feed throughout the season. Whereas if you have a 12:1 or more narrow, that's going to tell us we have more harder, compact ground and that the carbon is not enough to support the nitrogen. So that's when we stick to banding the nitrogen closer to the seed, or banding the nitrogen closer, as well as sticking to 10 pounds per every 1 CEC on your soil test. So we want that ratio to be a 12:1 or greater because that shows that our carbon storage is good enough to get us through that season and not over apply nitrogen so that we burn it out of the system. And why I was talking about understanding where your soil's at before you apply a biological and a food source is understanding pH in your soil as well. So we watch the carbon to see if there's enough food in the system for the microbes, but also the pH. And what I mean by that is fungi prefer a more acidic pH, so they're looking anywhere from like 5.5 to 6.4, whereas bacteria can live anywhere. That's the first thing that was ever welcome to this planet is bacteria. So it can live in any pH. And if we have a bacterial dominant rhizosphere, again, it burns out the carbon in the system and it raises the pH. When you raise the pH, you don't allow ammonium to get into the system. You don't allow most microbes to collect around the rhizosphere. So we want to focus on bringing that pH down into a more acidic area. So we always reach for 6.5 is a really good place to start. And we do give more notes on how to bring that pH down, how to add carbon back into your system. If you have really high pH and high mag and high calcium, how to open that soil back up and allow more nutrients to get up into the plant. So when you have more nitrate in the system versus ammonium, these are the different nitrogen sources I'm talking about. So instead of just total nitrogen, we break it down into ammonium and nitrate. And Jason has done this research for a couple of years now that we show a direct correlation between 1-to-1 ratio in ammonium and nitrate directly correlated to yield. Why is that? Because ammonium decreases the pH and causes more microbes to join around the rhizosphere and helps with carbon storage and then more nutrient uptake. So we have to focus on bringing that pH down around the rhizosphere to allow more activity, better carbon storage, and higher nutrient uptake. And in addition to this, when you have an excess of one or the other, so for example, if you have more ammonium in the system versus nitrate, you're going to hinder the uptake of potassium, mag, and calcium, whereas vice versa, if you have more nitrate in the system, that's going to be harder to take up sulfur and it will potentially leach out calcium as well. So to take us back into that is because we're watching so many different components, the WEOC, C to N, HT3, H3A, again, to remind you that's how much is actively being taken up into the plant, we start to build baselines and figure out where our optimal nutrient ratio is at and how to make these tiny tweaks throughout your season to help that relationship equal out. So we show that on our reports. And I'm gonna kind of show you 365. We roll out our new dashboard February 1st. So what I show you today is kind of a bummer because it's not released yet. These are a little bit old, but we can at least see what 365 does with that information. So again, we help you understand what growth stages to collect soil and tissue. We help you understand the results. We have a full video series, 2 years of video series. The first video series, I always joke about, I had to edit the first season. It's terrible editing, terrible. Didn't go to school for it, but the content is incredible. I think the nitrogen episode is one of our best. We had so many people enroll into the video series. It's 2 hours long. So we ended up building nutrient notes to type out everything in these video series. But we had farmers and clients calling and they're like, I'm in my combine, I got popcorn, I'm listening to these video series, these are awesome. So we have the video series available, we have the nutrients summary notes, that's every single nutrient broken down into what levels you should be at, how to adjust those, how much to apply. So we have that available. But our goal is to help you shorten the amount of time that you start to understand your field and make these recommendations. So that first year, we have you follow a protocol, build your baselines, and then we break it down from there to figure out how to tweak and adjust your nutrient levels so that not only are you achieving the same, if not higher yields, but you're applying less and restoring the health of the soil at the same time. And we let the data speak for itself. So this isn't recommendations with specific products. We do work with companies that we intake their data and we're able to see how well it performs. And we have that information available on 365 as well. But here is your Agronomy 365 protocol. So this is just one of the options that we have. We have 6 tissue testing times and 3 soil testing times to help learn how your field behaves quicker. We broke it down to starting with just 2 zones. So 2 zones that you're going to be collecting the tissue and soil from. And you can do treated versus untreated, farm row versus fence row, high yielding versus low yielding. Whatever you want to compare so that you can start to see the behavior of your soil is fine by us. But we take these testing times so that we see the whole entire season on how that nutrient behaves. And you're able to compare how much is available in the soil and how much your tissue is actually taken up. So it's showing you those weak links, where those hinge points are at, of why your plant is not taking up that specific nutrient. It's really neat to see in a visual, and so that's why we built this dashboard. So you can see the visuals, you can have the recommendations, and all of the tools to be able to help you with that. So let's show you guys what we had before. Let's skip to here. So this is, again, old dashboard, but we'll give you a really good basis of the different visionary tools that we have. So this is the summary graph, and what we're looking at here is you're able to choose different zones and different growth stages to compare the soil and tissue to. So for example, this line here, this is the same zone that we're looking at. We're looking at zone 1. The bars are the tissue, and the line is the soil. So for this specific grower, we're seeing how much is available in the soil and how much is the tissue actually taken up. So you can make notes on here to your agronomist. You can make your own notes. You can ask questions. Of course, save PDFs. And your agronomist has access to this. So they can type back to you. You don't have to look through text messages, emails. You can make notes on this field to be able to make adjustments and track that progress. So this is just one of the graphs that we have. Here next to it this is showing the same zone at different growth stages. So this is showing where that nutrient is being taken up at those specific growth stages. Here is where growers spend a lot of time, and this isn't even 10% of what the dashboard shows now. But to give you an overview again, what we're looking at here instead of the last graph is the last one we were looking at 1 to 2 growth stages, maybe 3 or zones. This is showing you on a per nutrient basis, this is the whole entire trend for that nutrient on tissue for this season. So you can take your trends on specific nutrients on soil and tissue and compare them to past years. You can compare them against different zones. You can compare against everybody in 365, which a key note to this is we are absorbing Next Level Ag's clientele on 365, so everybody will only be going to 365. So you can compare to the average grower. We have high yielding growers with specific fields that are aggregated into this, so you can compare against high yield growers. If you're part of a group, you can compare against your group. You don't know who the individuals are in your group, your agronomist does, but that's aggregated data as well. So this is yet another great chart to be able to see those trends and start to make adjustments for the upcoming year. And again, there's more graphs. Okay, so this will look fairly similar on the new dashboard. This is a soil report, and this does look a little bit different than Next Level Ag. How we changed it is we put each nutrient in their own box where we color coordinate based on their ranking. We have a rating system, as well as those nutrient ratios that we're starting to track throughout the season. So we have that. And then here on the second page, we have your base sats up here on the left. These are your nutrient gauges, so we break it down to show you the indicator rating for that specific nutrient, all the macros there. And then we have a standard recommendation for you if you want that option. And then we have the 365 recommendations that are very specific. And what I mean by that is they are going to differ quite a bit from your standard recommendation, and that's because we take into account the ratios and relationships, as well as your in-depth soil analysis from the indicator. How this is changing with the February 1st rollout is we have hired an AI software engineer. So with every submission of a soil or tissue test, we have metadata that you guys will fill out, and with our AI system, it's going to create even further recommendations based off of application methods, weather, location, soil type. I mean, you name it, we're gathering that data to help you guys have extremely specific recommendations. So again, because I can't show the new dashboard, I'll just give you an overview of what's included for this year. Let's see here. I got my contact, okay. So this year, how we're changing it is, last year to enroll, it was $2,000 to subscribe. We are changing everything in that regards to make it more accessible to everybody. So instead of going to Next Level Ag to submit a soil or tissue test, you do everything through 365. So that app is available on dashboard to first set up on a web page, and then you have an app. So you can take your phone and your iPad out into the field, and you'll be able to mark where you're at taking that sample, put the metadata in there, you pay for the analysis, and then you get notifications to track your package all the way through when it's finished being analyzed. And then once you get results, it's emailed or texted right to you, and you're available to look at that in your app and see those recommendations. So everything is through the app now. Again, you'll have access to the video series, the nutrient summary notes, charts, graphs, of course our 365 feed, which our whole Agronomy 365 team is on there, as well as High Yield Growers. If you haven't visited that, definitely visit the Ag 365 feed, because I'm on there all the time. They've got great posts on that app. But in regards to the price, how that works is we are bringing it down to $500 for the grower level. We have a free version as well. So download the app. It's a 365 app. I'll put the QR code up here that you can scan, and you'll be alerted when you can download it. And as a free user, you can still send samples to 365 and get Next Level Ag and get recommendations. But you have access to the weather, to the 365 feed, and for the first couple of months, you'll have access to the video series and nutrient notes as well. So there's going to be a lot of stuff available for the growers as well as the free subscription. And then we have an agronomist subscription, and that's $2,000 for the subscription. And what comes with that is you have NP and K and sulfur tools. So these are tools that Jason built within 365 that gives you extremely specific recommendations, taking into account the yield goal, as we know that changes throughout the season, as well as the testing time when you sampled. So it gives you a breakdown of the entire field and each zone, and will tell you how much to apply at that time. Lastly, is Jason is starting June 1st until September 1st. Every 2 weeks, he's doing an event that he will be going through the soil and the tissue test at that specific growth stage for a few different crops. So you can purchase the 6 series event and actually feel like you're right there going through that soil and tissue test with him. So we have a lot of different ways that we don't want to take the power away from the agronomist. We want to give the agronomist more tools to be able to help their clients manage mid-season adjustments, so they start to see immediate return within the second year that you have your results back. So that's why we built 365. And again, if you guys have any questions on the program, or if you just want to try it out, or you want to learn more information, again, we'll be rolling that out February 1st with the new dashboard. And I'll put the QR code up here. I've got to get that from my marketing gal this morning. But you're able to be on there for free and check out what 365 has to offer. You can see what other growers are seeing on their page if they post. But anyway, hopefully that wasn't word vomit and too much information, but 365, it started for our Next Level Ag clients, and it has grown so quickly because growers are seeing that we have the data available at our fingertips. What we're doing isn't working, so we have to make these tweaks, and immediately they're seeing these differences, after building their trend lines. So hopefully, you guys are able to get on the 365 app February 1st, and if you have any questions in the meantime, please feel free to text me or call me, and I'm always available. Do you guys have questions about this in general before Jason steps up here? He'll be going through a lot more nutrient-based stuff, but yeah.
My understanding is that
and again, I just want to make sure everybody understands that this program is completely customizable. You don't have to follow the protocol that we have. This is just a protocol that will help you build the best baseline for your first year, but you can do whatever you see fit to your farm. If you want to try, hopefully Jason will talk about baseline a little bit, maybe a little bit if you have time. Baseline, Jason created that this year. That's our way of doing scripting and mapping so that we can make immediate, quick recommendations for your fields. But again, that first year is a baseline threshold building year. So I think last year, the reason I want to talk about it is last year we had a couple of farmers that sent in soil or tissue tests, and they were like, we got to get this back like right away, and we do too. I mean, next level egg is really quick. But it's important to know that when you get back those test results, that's a threshold for the next year. So our whole premise of the program is helping you understand first and build a game plan, and then use that the next year. And as you're collecting more soil and tissue next year, you're double checking, right? And keep doing those adjustments. Yeah. I could go on a soapbox about why, when it comes to microbiology, right now it's just really hard to, right now we're just developing an understanding. Recommendations are really hard to narrow down. When immediately you remove that soil from the ground, it's changing, just like that, already changes. And the variability across your field, depending on temperature, sunlight exposure, crop, soil type, all of that, moisture levels, that's gonna change microbes. But that shouldn't stop you from analyzing it and building a threshold. Think of it the same with soil and tissue. We know as we remove it from the plant and we ship it or take it in our pickup or anything, it changes. But that still helps us have an idea of how it works, and we get to maneuver and move those nutrients by studying that. The same with microbes. 3 years ago, I was doing classic microscopy, and I stopped doing that because it just wasn't, I couldn't reproduce that every time. Just how I would, move my instrument to gather the soil causes variancy in that. And so you can't keep reproducing that same sample, and it just wasn't accurate or precise enough for me. And so we moved into qPCR and DNA sequencing. Are you guys familiar with that at all? In a nutshell, what it does is it takes mRNA, so what's actively transcribing, what's actively converting nutrients on a biological level. So with DNA, you get to see everything that's available in your soil, microbe-wise. Whether it's dead, dormant, or alive, it's picking it up. And the qPCR is picking up what's active in that. Why that's important is because we might already have the microbes that we need for that crop in our soil. And that's why when you apply a biological, maybe your neighbor, Adam, has a 7-bushel increase and you don't, and you're like, well, this is snake oil, or boost didn't work, the carbon didn't work. That's because your soil is so different. We didn't study where the soil was at first to see if it had the right pH. Does it have carbon in the storage in the system so you can provide nutrients for the biological that you just applied? These are all really important ways to not only have you take control of your operations, but also to give data to the client or to the company to show this is how your product is performing. So maybe it did exactly what it was supposed to do. You just didn't see it in the yield at the end of the year. But if you study the data, it did do what it was supposed to. So this is our way of showing that, especially when it comes to microbes, we have to just build a threshold and just understand where those levels are at and just try to learn from that. You can't go all the way with one thing. That's why we use relationships and ratios. There's always too much of a good thing. So with qPCR and DNA, I wanted that to be like the next thing that would help us. But when COVID came around, it now takes about at least 4 weeks to get a DNA and qPCR biological analysis back. And even then people are like, well, and I was too, I'm like, what am I supposed to do if it takes a month to get back? Well, that's your baseline. That's where you start. And then you test again next year and see where it's at. But just to do that on a large scale is so difficult, and to me just not worth it yet because it is so variable across the field. I think within the next 10 years, we'll be able to go, maybe within the next 5, we'll be able to go in the field and take a sample and have an analysis read then so that it's true to your soil. Nothing's changing. when it's shipped and analyzed, and that's when we'll learn more. It's the same in the medical world. As soon as we study something outside of the tissue, it changes, but we can at least learn about it and be able to maneuver what that is. So, great question. That was a really great question. Does anybody else have? Yeah. That's a good question. Jason will talk about that more, but yes, we do focus on WEOC heavier than OM. You know, as I said before, OM is really hard to change, and it's just not a great indicator of what's available because it's quantity, not quality, and what type of microbes are coming into that rhizosphere. But we do watch that because that also shows us how much nitrogen to apply at the beginning of the season so we don't over-apply and burn out the carbon. You know, OM doesn't help reflect it as closely as WEOC to yield.
Resistant plant.
Yeah, I mean, the number of times, and granted, I've only been looking at the research from this only 3 years. Jason would have a lot more information on this than I would. But like I said, we watch the ammonium to nitrate in the system. We look at the pH and the WEOC. And as we started to watch that and push more towards the biological side of the soil with a carbon source, so whether that be Boost or you try turkey or chicken compost is really good for carbon as well. But having that carbon source with a biological, we immediately started to see correlation with phosphorus uptake, especially if there was fungal spores in that biological. You want the fungal spores with that lower pH, immediately raises your P because fungi deliver phosphorus like you wouldn't believe. You have high fungal biomass around your rhizosphere. Not only does it protect from invasive species, as well as weeds or root-fitting nematodes, anything like that. If you have the fungal capacity there, your P uptake is huge. Your nitrogen uptake, because there's so much ammonium delivered to the system from the fungi, from the protists. That's how we're seeing that correlation, and they don't understand that it's because of your biology, delivering, converting all of those extra nutrients in the soil. So yeah, it is really neat. When it comes to how your soil looks, I think that's one of like the biggest hurdles that I've ran into is we're so used to, especially I'm from Iowa, and in Iowa, the corn rows are like nice and tidy. You don't see anything in between. They want to see those crisp lines. And I get it. I know that looks great. And talking about fungicide, there's a time and place for fungicide. I'm not like a biology hippie that, no, you can't apply fertilizer or fungicide. There's a time and place for that and an amount. But you have to consider that your crop rows might not look nice and tidy and neat. But that's because as you build a strong, sturdy rhizosphere, as you have that carbon, the lower pH, the fungal community, the floors might not look clean, but everything is protected around that rhizosphere. Does any forest floor, natural forest floor, is that clean? It's got coverage everywhere. And they don't have invasive species because of that. Everything's protected. So we have to jump this hurdle of the idea of keeping everything nice and tidy, over applying, just pulling it back. Too much of a good thing, really, just evening out the system. So I'll let Jason take it. Am I over?
No, you're fine. That's
Okay.
fine.